Hello, and welcome to CBM Calling. I'm Terry Smith and the Executive Director of Canadian Baptist Ministries. This is our 80th broadcast of CBM Calling, and I am so honored today to have as our guest a new friend, but a friend I've heard a lot about over a number of years, Andy Harrington. Andy is the new Executive Director of Canadian Foodgrains Bank. One of the cool parts of my job as the head of CBM is that I got to represent our organization with 14 other church houses on the board of Canadian Foodgrains Bank. As a matter of fact, CBM was one of the founding members of the Canadian Foodgrains Bank back in the 1980s. And I've been able to witness the growth and the expansion of the reach of CFGB as it's brought together church houses across Canada for the cause of ending global hunger. So Andy, welcome to CFGB. Welcome to CBM Calling today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who is Andy Harrington?
Well, thank you, Terry. It's a real privilege to be here with you. I like the idea that you call me a new friend because that's kind of how I'm feeling as well. So that's a good thing. So a little bit about me. I'm not entirely sure I love talking about myself tons, so a little bit. My name is Andy Harrington. As you can tell, I'm a native New Yorker from this accent. No, I was born in England, but Canadian now for 21 years. Been living here, and I became a citizen a long time ago. My background actually was in youth work, working with marginalized young people until 2012. I was very engaged in working with Youth for Christ around the world. And Youth Unlimited, as they're often called in Canada. Yeah. So I started working for them way back in 1986 in the UK as a young man, and ended up leading a chapter over there. And then they asked me if I would go and plant Youth for Christ in Bosnia and Croatia during the war there. So in the mid-90s, myself and my family spent 2 years living there, had some interesting adventures, and we're very, very happy to have been part of that, but carried some things with us as well coming out of that. Moved over to head up Youth for Christ in Vancouver, actually, in 1999, and spent 13 wonderful years there. And as part of that, was very engaged in work around the world. So as well as heading up Youth for Christ in Vancouver, we had projects all over the place. One in particular was in Rwanda, and I spent a lot of time in Rwanda setting up that project and working on it. And through that, I really got engaged more in the educational side of things. And ending up leaving YFC, which I hadn't planned to because I love the job so much, to become the CEO of an organization called the Wellspring Foundation for Education, which is where I first connected. Well, actually, no, I had connected before that with CBM, but we really connected with CBM. Maybe we'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah. And our project was our program was very in-depth in Rwanda and East Africa. And so we had 200,000 children going through our education programs there via the teacher training that we did. Worked very closely with the government, and so I got very engaged in the educational side of development work. And suddenly, out of nowhere, was asked if I would consider becoming Foodgrains Bank Executive Director. Said no, I wouldn't be interested. And here I am. So that's a story in itself.
We did not relent. We pushed and pushed, and we're glad to have you.
Very glad to be here.
I know you're married. You have a daughter.
I am. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm married. I have a wonderful wife called Helen, and who's actually visiting here for the first time in a couple of weeks. I'm speaking to you in Winnipeg at the moment. I'm doing 1 week at home in BC where I live, and then 1 week here in Winnipeg. I have a daughter who's also engaged in the international development world, and I have a son who recently went to be with Jesus, and look forward to seeing him again one day.
Oh, bless you, Andy. Thank you so much for sharing. So we have a lot of points in common, and gosh, we could talk a lot just about what you've already shared. Certainly the Rwanda connection. It was really through very, very dear friends of ours, of Heather's and mine, Karen McCullough, that I first heard about you and your work with Wellspring. Karen and my wife Heather began an educational program with the Association of Baptist Churches in Rwanda, and that Wellspring then developed beautifully. It's just been an amazing work. So that's been a really, really neat point of connection for us as well. And I know you do have a really deep love for Rwanda. I love your passion when you talk about Rwanda. The other point of connection is you told me last week that you were once the head of the Youth Roundtable for the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. And
That's right.
inasmuch you were a frequent speaker at Canadian Baptist youth events.
Yeah, so I was on the roundtable and headed it up for a while, but also I used to do a lot of youth event speaking, and so I spoke at events like Spring Forth and Tidal Impact out in Eastern Canada. I spoke at a number of youth camps. I had friends who I think friends like Matt Wilkinson and others who were very engaged in the Baptist side, and so I had a lot of connections on the youth side of CBM when I was at Youth for Christ, and then, as you say, in Rwanda, we formed a wonderful connection through Karen and through AEBR. And actually what happened was that Karen asked us if we would help on a project that she was involved in there, out in the area called, it's right in the western side of Rwanda, right on the edge of DRC.
Yeah.
So we did a 2-year project that we committed to there. And actually the project took off. And we cemented it as one of the long-term projects for Wellspring, and that project has been extremely successful, working with the Baptist churches there. We've actually extended that now, and we work with every primary school and early childhood education establishment in that area. So it's kind of grown beyond, but they're still very engaged, and it's a wonderful project. I was there in. Last time I visited was in March. It's quite incredible what's going on there.
Really? I mean, I know of that project definitely through our connections with the AEBR, but it has become a pilot project for the whole country and for the Ministry of Education in Rwanda. So hats off to Wellspring for its amazing impact in Rwanda, and hats off to you for hearing God's call to join CFGB. So what is it that prompted you to take this job after we pursued you?
Well, it's a really interesting story, and I'll try and tell it shortly. But I was extremely happy in my last role. I didn't anticipate I'd be making a change. I was very, very comfortable with the work that was happening at Wellspring. Part of it comes into losing our son. We lost him as a result of a workplace accident, and so we took a year off to really think through what it is we wanted to do, and not to take any decisions there. And actually, I have a personal kind of rule of thumb that says after 5 years, I really want to hear from God to say you should stay here, because I don't want to be in the way. I always want to make sure there's other people coming through, and I don't want to get stale. And we had heard from God, 5 years into Wellspring to stay. And the next time I wanted to review it was at 8 years, where I wanted to ask God, do you still want me to stay? And that fell during that period. And so what happened was I at the end of that period, I said to Helen, we should really, really pray, and she'd agreed with me as well, and really think through what we want to do, because I was coming to the conclusion I had done everything I could at Wellspring. It needed a fresh set of eyes. We'd really, got over the initial challenges, and during that, in that year, I had been approached by CFGB, and had said no on the basis that I was happy, and B, we weren't making any big decisions. And the night I said to Helen, we should be praying. It's time to pray. We got through the year. That day, about 4 hours afterwards, I got an email saying, hey, this position is back open, and we just wondered if you had changed your mind at all. And I thought, that's really weird. That timing is very strange. So we prayed through Christmas and decided to let our name stand. And the more I found out about CFGB, and I have been very aware, it's a big name in the development field. The more I found out about what they were doing, the more I was intrigued, and the more I realized the impact that this organization was having around the world. And I remember a night very well on an island, one of the Pacific Gulf Islands, just praying and really sensing God saying, I'm opening a door here. I'm inviting you to come and be part of this if you want to be. It's up to you. I won't abandon you, but I'm inviting you to become and be part of this. And that was just before I accepted the position, actually. So, so that's the story. It's kind of a calling, and a strange story, but a good one.
That's amazing. That is really a very powerful story, and how God was at work in your heart. One of the things that that I love about CFGB is it's probably the broadest ecumenical mission organization that we're part of at CBM. We're part of all kinds of networks of Baptist relief and development agencies, or organizations that work in theological education, or any number of things. But boy, man, when I gather with the board members of CFGB, I am with my Catholic brothers and sisters, and Pentecostal and Salvation Army and the United Church and Presbyterian and Nazarene, and the list goes on and on. And I love that the breadth of representativity. But it seems to me that when you're working with a group of churches, unlike, say, Youth for Christ, or perhaps even Wellspring, you really do represent the mission passion around hunger of specific church-based organizations. And I just want to ask you, how are you finding that? That's quite a change.
You know, honestly, Terry, it was one of the things that attracted me here. The fact that we can have 15 member churches that have very broad understandings of theology from one end of the spectrum to another. And the fact that we can all sit around a table and not have those debates because everybody is completely united in the fact that God's heart is for the poor, and that we can be united around the fact that we have to do what we can to end global hunger. The kingdom orientation of that from a holistic gospel sense. I found that one of the most attractive things about CFGB, even before I took the job. I find it even more so now in the job. There's no doubt that the unity that we are able to bring together is one of our most awesome strengths, actually.
It is.
It is. And I've been so impressed. So one of the things I'm doing at the moment actually is meeting with every individual staff member, which is a lot of staff members, and also every individual member house, as we call them, all the 15 members. Everybody is united around our cause. And I actually think, Terry, that for me, the gospel is a wide thing. We've tended to think of personal salvation, and certainly as a Youth for Christ worker, many times I've preached the gospel and wanted to see people saved, and that is such an important thing. And you can almost look at that as the vertical component of the cross. It's the place where God reaches down to us through the person of Jesus, and we reach up and we can be saved. But there is a horizontal component to the cross as well, where Jesus reaches out his arms. And in a sense, I see that as reaching his arms to the world, to the poor, the least of these. What theologians have called the quartet of the vulnerable, the widow, the poor, the refugee, and the orphan. And that's where CFGB comes in.
Yeah.
So you're board member, you'll receive. I seem to have gone dead for a moment. Are you there? Sorry, it just froze for a moment. Sorry. Yeah. With 10 projects that we committed to just in the last month, $6.4 million, helping 48,000 people.
Wow.
And as I wrote those numbers, I thought of I didn't see the zeros. I tried to picture the people. And that for me is just a part of the gospel, as much part of the gospel as anything else. It's a holistic mission that we're involved in. So I think our diversity and our unity over this one thing is one of the greatest strengths that we have. And I want the Canadian public to know about that as well. I don't want to keep it. I want this is a best kept secret. I want the Canadian public to see this is what love looks like in action. This is the church at its best.
It's amazing. I love your passion when you describe that, because a couple of years ago, I traveled as a board member with CFGB and some of the other board members and Jim Cornelius to Ethiopia. And I really reflected on what it is that makes our response to hunger a Christian response to hunger. And it's exactly that, is how do we incarnate shalom and the love of God in a specific place. So yeah, I can definitely resonate with you. So when you wake up in the morning and you put your feet on the ground or put them in your slippers or wherever you put your feet in the morning when you get out of bed, what is it that drives you?
Well, I kind of just alluded to it, really. Our numbers are big in terms of the people we help, and we have lots of statistics and PowerPoints and everything, and it's wonderful to talk big numbers. But you know what drives me? It's the one individual, and I have a picture on my desk, and if I was at home in BC, I'd show you the picture now, but I'm in Winnipeg and it's not here. Although I'm going to get a copy of it and put it here. It's a picture of a lady I met in a village in Rwanda in 2010. And the picture, it's a black and white picture, and she's reaching out like this. And you could interpret the picture to look as though she's asking for something. But what was actually happening was she was welcoming me and a few of my friends in the village. And she was kind of the gatekeeper for the village. And she also she made sure that we had drink and food and everything else. And I don't know how much of a month's part of her salary it cost her. I don't even know if she had a salary, but she was welcoming and hospitable. And I get out of bed in the morning to help her and the people like her. That's what empowers me. And by the nature of this job and working with governments around the world and our relationships with the Canadian government, you know, and all the, you can get lost in it all. So I get out of bed in the morning, and when I go into my office, the first thing I look at is that picture, and that's why I do what I do. And I think most of us who are in this field have some kind of picture like that in our head. There is someone we met somewhere. There was someone we know that represents it. I want to make sure I never, ever forget who I really work for, who I really work for, and then who I work for.
Yeah, I can totally resonate. For me, it's connecting with partners. A year ago, and I've told this story before, but a year ago I was with a group of pastors in Goma in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, 700 pastors who had gathered together. They can only afford to come together as a denomination every 5 years. They're so poor, but they brought these pastors together. And when I think, why do I do what I do? It's because I really want to contribute to equipping pastors and leaders in local churches for transformational mission in their place. So you're right. I think we all have that picture that gets us up in the morning and gets us moving and reminds us of what faithfulness is all about.
You know, Terry, I agree with that. And by the way, our office was probably about a mile away from where you were. We were just the other side of the border. Here's the thing on that picture, and here's the thing about those people you met, and here's the thing about all my friends that I have in Rwanda and other places around the world as well. Every single one of us is created in the image of God. And we live in a world where that is actively campaigned against. We talk about the other, those people over there. In a world of politicized nationalism and everything that goes, populism and everything goes with it, we have started to treat people as the others. And when we start treating people as the others, we take away their worth, we take away their dignity, we take away we're all image bearers, and we take that away. And I think we have to remember, and I try to remember when I look at that picture, I'm sure you remember when you see your friends there, there is no other. There's just all of us made in the image of Christ. All of us absolutely enfolded in his love. And it's our job as Christians to be ambassadors of that reconciliation. For me, I do that through working with Canadian Foodgrains Bank and what we do to end global hunger. For you, I know you're part of that as well. And for CBM, it's the numerous ways in which you integrate that holistic mission into what you do. But there is no other. There's just us in this together.
Absolutely. Andy, say a quick word about Jim. How's Jim doing? You've taken, you're filling a big pair of slippers, Jim Cornelius. Tell us how Jim is involved with CFGB these days.
Well, as Jim consistently tells me, his feet are only size 7, but as I consistently tell him, they should be size 20 because it's a big pair of shoes to fill. Jim is doing great. I've just come off of a call with him, actually. We're forming a really good partnership. I have the great privilege of having him as my special advisor. And he's taking a lead role, particularly with some of our relationships with the Canadian government and some of the funding relationships we have there. He's also being a very wise counselor. And I think I am deeply blessed in, first of all, the friendship that's growing there, but also in having his wisdom to call on after 22 years of heading up what is one of the most complex NGOs in Canada, non-governmental organizations. There's no doubt that with all the joy of 15 member houses and the association that brings, it also brings its challenges as well. So I think Jim is helping me not to tread on places I shouldn't tread and to tread in places I should tread. And it's a joy to have him working with us still.
Well, my buddy Gord King and I dream of the day that Jim writes his memoirs or writes a book that calls the church to faithful discipleship around addressing global hunger. So he's your special advisor, but you can be my special emissary and say, Jim, please write that book. Our churches need that book.
I will do that because I would love to read that book as well, Terry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He has so much to share. Yeah. Send him our greetings.
I absolutely will.
Canadian Baptists are really committed to the work of CFGB. CFGB, of course, is a really strong rural, has a strong rural connection to Christians, largely on the prairies, but really throughout the whole country, with their growing projects that are contributing resources to help address global hunger. Our urban churches, we're encouraging them to support the farmers who are raising crops that are then sold, or livestock that's sold for to help fund the work. How can we as Canadian Baptists do more to address global food insecurity?
Well, I think the first, it's we talk about giving, learning, praying, advocating, and I think the first thing we need to understand is how hunger is growing across the world at the moment. So we had a few years where it was getting better, and the last few years it's got worse. So we know that there are very different stats, but the most reliable stat would say that as of last year, there were 690 million people that are going hungry in the world today. But there are numerous problems that are causing that are about to cause that stat to explode. Climate change, especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa, is causing major issues for agriculture. The challenges of increased conflict in places like Yemen and other places in the Middle East, places like the Horn of Africa and East Africa and other places, we're seeing way more, in places like Syria, we're seeing way more displacement of peoples, both internationally and internally. So you're seeing hunger rise as a result of that. And now we have COVID. COVID has caused a breakdown of food supply chains across the world. And so we're actually projecting approximately over 130 million more people will be hungry within the next year. So we have to be aware of this. I was delighted to see last week that the Canadian government announced another $400 million for overseas development aid, particularly around the areas of combating the effects of COVID. So what I would say to Canadian Baptists is this: be aware of the situation that we're in. Be aware that hunger is growing around the world. And I don't know who's watching this who has been hungry. And I mean severely hungry. I don't mean that they fasted for a day. I mean severely hungry. I have not been in that situation, but I have been in situations of where people are, in places like Ethiopia, in places like Zimbabwe. I've seen it firsthand. It is a horrific thing. So the first thing we need to do is to learn about the causes and to learn about what we can do. So that's where we begin to advocate. We begin to say, let's be involved in these issues around the world. Let's look at what we can do, both locally and globally, in order to make a difference. Let's learn to give. I mean, you have an opportunity to support CBM's work at CFGB through giving to CBM. But we actually maintain an account here at CFGB that's CBM's account. If you give to it, CBM gets to program some of these programs around the world. So would be to do that and to pray into this situation, to ask for God to intervene in these situations around the world, and to pray for those workers on the front line and the people that are dealing with this. So that would be what I would say. There are ways in which you can gather around the issue and ways you can directly intervene in the issue by coming alongside CBM to actually fund some of the programs that they run through Canadian Foodgrains Bank. We have this wonderful thing where for every dollar donated, we get $4 matched by the Canadian government or $3 out of another fund. But your money gets multiplied when you give to CBM through our work at Foodgrains Bank.
Again, I just want to reiterate how encouraged I am by your presence and the passion that you exude when you describe the opportunity for Canadian Baptists to support this work. I have visited many of our CFGB programs around the world, in South Sudan, in the Congo and Rwanda. I've seen CFGB programming in India and Kenya, many, many countries. And I can tell you that the high standards, the excellence, the spirit of humility, and the commitment of the people that are working on the ground for the poor and the widows and the orphans and the most vulnerable is making a huge difference. Thank you, by the way, for the work that is happening in Lebanon as well. We are so grateful for the CFGB partnership in Lebanon with Meirath and the Lebanese Baptists. So again, I want to thank you. Andy, I hate to tell you this, buddy, but our time's up, man. You and I could have kept talking for a long time. But
sure.
Sooner or later, we would have lost some people along the way.
Yeah.
But I am so grateful again for you and for your availability. It's been great to have you with us. I look forward to many other conversations in Vancouver and Winnipeg, here in the Toronto area, or wherever God allows you and me to meet together. If you've been watching our CBM Calling today, I just want to thank you as well. Thank you for your interest in our organization and in our partnership with Canadian Foodgrains Bank. On Thursday of this week, we will be honored to have as our guest Dr. Danny Zacharias. Danny is the head of the Canadian Baptist Indigenous Roundtable. He's First Nations from Nova Scotia. He's also a New Testament scholar at Acadia Divinity College. And Danny will be talking with us on Thursday about the standoff that is currently happening in St. Mary's Bay in Nova Scotia and in the Bay of Fundy between Indigenous fishermen and other fishermen, and the tensions around the lobster industry in that area. And I think it'll be helpful for us to be reminded by Danny of the commitments that we have made as Canadian Baptists to repairing what has been a historically broken relation. Thank you again for having listened to us today. Thank you, every individual who sent in a note on Facebook. We appreciate you, and we're thankful for your involvement in God's work in the world. Have a great rest of the day. And thank you once again, Andy. It's been wonderful chatting with you.
My privilege, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you.